What is TrackMat and how is it different from masking inside CreateStudio 3? Well, the answer is TrackMat is similar to masking, except that it's a little bit different because it allows you to animate your mask separately as well as the element that you're working with. Hey, what is going on, everyone? My name is Ali, and in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to work with TrackMat. And before we dive deeper into this, I've got a couple of examples that I want to share with you before we start creating. So let's go ahead and start watching this. Now, before we start creating, I'd like to say that this is my third series of videos explaining masks. So if you haven't watched the previous two, be sure to go ahead and click on the link that shows up on the top right to watch these videos so you can understand the fundamentals of masking and how to create multiple screens in your projects. And then when you're done, come back here and continue to watch this one until the end so you can understand the difference between TrackMat and the typical way of masking or masks inside CreateStudio 3. So let's go ahead and start creating together. So before we do that, I'm going to remove everything that I've got in my timeline, but the background and the text. So I'm going to highlight everything in the timeline like this, delete everything just like that, and then make my timeline smaller. Then we can start from scratch. So my first step would be to go into the studio, and then where it says shapes, I'm going to click that, and then I'm going to grab the abstract shape that is right here, grab it onto my canvas, and I'm going to change this color from blue to a red. You can easily do that by going under the right panel, under settings, where it says colors, you simply just open up the color settings and then choose whatever color you want. For me, I'm going to make it red like that. And then I'm going to make a duplicate of this shape. Now, I'd like to mention when working with TrackMats that it's very important that you rename your layers just so you know exactly what you're working with. Why? Because when you get into a TrackMats and you start making selections of the TrackMats available from the list, which I'm going to show you in a second, you're going to find a lot of stuff in there. And this is pretty obvious because when you start creating projects, you're going to have lots of layers in your timeline. And so it is very convenient to rename your layers to make sure that you're well organized and you know exactly what you're working with. And so you don't get lost when applying TrackMats to different elements. Now let's continue working on our design. And so I'm gonna make a duplicate of my shape by hitting the Control D on my keyboard. You can press Command D if you're on OS. And then I'm going to rename the duplicate layer, right click that and then rename it and then call this one mask 1. And then I'm going to drag this one, my duplicate layer, a little bit to the right. And I'm going to apply a fade in animation to the first one right here. So I can easily do that by going onto the right panel where it says motion. It's going to be in. I'm going to choose fade and then I'm going to make it fade in like that. So we have a nice fade in at the very beginning, just like that. And as soon as the fade in animation finishes, this is where we're going to start adding our image onto the mask. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the duplicated layer, which is mask number 1. Make sure that it pretty much starts exactly when the fade in animation finishes, right? And then my next step would be to go back into my studio. I've got a few images for the sake of the tutorial to show you how you can easily do that. You're more free to get your own images by importing them into the project media, or you can also go into the stock and then find images from Pixabay or Pixels or any of those sites that are already integrated into the software. So I'm going to start with this image right here by dragging it and dropping it onto the canvas. And then I'm going to click on the fit to screen button to make image size smaller in my canvas, just like that. And next up is I'm going to drag my mask layer on top of the image, just like that. And then I'm going to decrease its opacity just a little bit more so I can see what's underneath it. And then I can resize my image. So my first way of doing that is I'm going to have a close shot of this lady where we have the image a little bit larger in size, just like that, to only display her face inside the mask, right? Once you get that covered, you should go on to the next step. And so I also want to highlight that it's very important when you're working with masks that you want to make sure that your images or video clips they are at least bigger in size than your masks on the canvas. The reason you're doing that, because if you have smaller footage, whether that's an image or videos, then you're going to end up with some gaps in between and it's not going to look right. So make sure that your image is bigger than the mask. And then our next step would be to simply click on the mask layer and then want to make sure that we increase its opacity back again to 100%. And then now we want to apply track mask. So this is where it becomes very powerful because you can do so much with it than the standard way of working with masks inside CreateStudio 3. So my first step would be to click on the actual image right there in the timeline, and then I'm going to go under settings and find where it says track matte. It should be the very last option before tiles. So you click that, and then now we have the preset settings for track matte to choose between the lists. Once I open up the drop down menu, you can see, so this is what I'm talking about. You have a list of layers that shows up in the drop down menu, and that is why I want to stress on renaming your files or your layers in the timeline so you're well organized. Now let's go ahead and pick up mask number 1, and your next step would be to change the type from Luma to Alpha, just so you can see the image in full color like that. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some hand drawings to the actual image, the footage that we've got separately. And this is really powerful. So I'm going to show you that in a second. Let's start with the mask layer first. So to do that, I'm going to go onto the left panel and then click on the effects and components icon. Then I'm going to drag my doodle effect onto the mask layer right there. And as we see, we now have our hand drawing ready to start illustrating our image. And so I've got my preset settings opened up on the right, on the top right. All I'm going to do is I'm going to change the style of the hand by clicking on the change hand. Then I've got a bunch of hand styles that I can choose from: real hands, 2D, and even 3D. They're really beautiful. But in my example, I'm going to choose one of the real hands. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit until I find the one that I want to use. It's going to be this one. And then I'm going to change the shaking percentage so that I make the drawing much smoother while it's playing, right? So I'm going to change the shaking from 30%, decrease it to 5%, just like that. So changing the value from 30 to 5%. Then once we go back right here, I'm going to click play, and now you can see that we have the image is being illustrated inside the shape, just like that, right? This is really beautiful. Now we're not done yet, so this is really powerful. That's what I'm talking about when it comes to track matte, is that now we have animated our mask, and you can apply any animation, by the way. It doesn't have to be doodle animation. It could be anything. You could use preset motion, you can use custom animation. It's really up to you how you want to use it. But the good thing about track matte is that you can animate both separately. Why? Because track matte's layers are still on the timeline, versus when you apply the typical way of masking, you simply select both layers, right click, and then you choose mask. What happens is that the mask layer, it becomes part of the actual image. But when it comes to track matte, the mask layer remains on the timeline. So it is also important that you make sure that the mask layer is lined up perfectly in terms of length in the timeline with your actual image or video that you're working with. Okay, next up, I'm going to go and select my image so I can animate this one and add some scale animation to it. So for this one, I'm going to click on add animation right here. I'm going to choose position and scale so I can scale it down and make sure it fits into the canvas, into the mask. And then I've got my keyframes right there. I'm going to slow this down just a little bit more by dragging the second keyframe towards the right. Select my second keyframe, and then I can go under settings and then make my adjustments, scale down the image just like that. You can see as I'm scaling it down, it becomes smaller, and obviously we can see the little bit gap on the right side, which is a red color, right? So I want to make sure that the position of my mask should be, so let's just lock this one right here, so I can easily just drag this guy and then move it up. And then I want to make sure that it covers the mask enough like this. Let's just try and resize it just a little bit more, drag it to the right side, something like this, and make sure it is covering our mask like that. And there we go. So let's have a play from the very beginning. Take a look, fade in, and then we have the illustration. And next up is the zoom out of the image like that. This is really handy and it's so beautiful. Next up, we've got another example that we want to create together. So let me just delete this, and then I'm going to start the other example also from scratch. Go back to my studio, and then I'm going to grab, let's do a rectangle. So I can hit the shift and the letter R on my keyboard to grab a rectangle. And I'm going to resize this rectangle like that. I'm also going to make it rounded so I can grab one of the dots around the corners so I can, you know, make the radius look rounded instead of just a 90-degree angles on both on all angles of the rectangle, just like that. And then I'm going to change the color of this one. So instead of blue, I can go into one of my favorite colors, the one that was in the example, which was the yellow one right here. And then I'm going to make a duplicate of this image, right? So I'm going to make a duplicate by hitting Control D right there. And I'm going to resize the next one, or the duplicate image, and make it a little bit smaller in size. So instead of 20, I could just go with 19% instead. And then I'm going to right click the layer in the timeline. And then I'm going to call this one mask number 1. And before we dive deeper into grabbing our images, I always like to design the backgrounds as well as the masks for the entire design or all images. And then I come back and start working with each image separately. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a duplicate of both together by highlighting both layers in the timeline. And I can simply just hit Control D. Again, it could be Command D for you if you're an OS. And then once you make a duplicate, now we have 2 duplicates right there ready for us to use. So these guys are going to drag them a little using the keyboard, holding the shift key and a right arrow, so I can drag them a little to the right, so I can make these guys in the middle of the screen just like that. And I'm going to make sure that they are starting, you know, a little bit early in time right here. And I want to make sure that these guys, that there's no gap pretty much, you know, between the layers, so I can just rearrange the order of the layers just like that. And then I'm going to select both again, make another duplicate, and then drag these guys a little bit to the right. Then I can also drag them a little bit to the right. So we now have our 3 element designs, backgrounds, and masks ready to go. And then all we got to do is simply apply some masking to each one of those, right? Let's go back to the very beginning and then start working with the first one that's on the left side. So I'm going to start by grabbing the images from my media files right there. I'm going to start with the same image again right here. I'm going to click on Fit to Screen. I'm going to grab it on top of the image right here. I might as well just grab the mask number 1 and get it up on here right there. Decrease the opacity just a little bit more like this. And then I can simply resize the image just so we can have a close-up shot on our face inside the mask, just like that. And remember, when you're done, you want to click on the mask layer and then go back and then increase opacity back to 100%. One thing that we don't want to forget is renaming the rest of the masks that we've got in the timeline, because we made duplicates, so we still have the same names for all masks, right? So for this one, I'm going to right click and rename it. Instead of mask 1, I'm just going to make it mask number 2. And then for the last one, rename it, and then I'm going to call it mask number 3. And then we're all set. Now, let's go ahead and start applying some track masks in there, okay? So I'm gonna drag the image to the bottom right there. And then this is our mask, so I can just drag it above it right here. And in order to apply track matte, again, the step to do that is simply selecting your image, not the mask. It needs to be the image. And all you gotta do is simply go under settings where it says track matte at the very bottom before tiles. You open that up, and then you're gonna have a preset with a drop-down menu. Open that up, and then we're going to select mask number 1. It's very important that when you do that you always change the type from Luma to Alpha, just so you can see your images in full color, right? So they're not faded out. And then you can animate this. So my first step would be to start with animating the rounded rectangle. So I'm going to apply a fade in animation to it, right? So I select that, and then I'm going to go under motion on the right panel. I'm going to go and select fade and then fade in. Then this is where the animation ends. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my playhead right after the fade in animation, and I'm going to grab my images, like the image as well as the mask layer, to the right side right after the fade in animation ends. And then I'm going to start animating the mask. So all I'm going to do is I will select the mask layer right there. And for this one, I'm going to apply, let's do a scale animation for this one so that we can have it scale from the top all the way to the bottom. And so the way how to do this is very simple. Once you have your mask layer selected, all you need to do is go under settings on the right panel, where it says anchor point, you click that, and then you want to choose the top middle right there. And we can see that there's a little rounded purple arrow right there. It shows us the anchor point. What that means is that the animation is going to start from the top, so we can have the image or the mask scale all the way from the very top to the bottom. And I'm going to show you that in a second. So we got that covered. Now we go and click on add animation right here. And then we're going to choose scale, okay? And I'm going to drag the second keyframe a little bit to the right. Then I'm going to select my first keyframe. And then from there, I can just drag my mask from the bottom all the way to the top. Now I might as well just do some opacity as well so that it looks nicer and smoother. So I can go back and then hover between both keyframes. Just make one click with my mouse to open up my properties panel one more time, and then I can make other selections under properties. So I've got scale already, but I'm going to do opacity as well. And then I'm going to go back, select my first keyframe. And then I already set up my scale size, how I want to start this. Then I'm going to go under settings and then decrease the opacity all the way to 0, so that when it plays, it's going to start like scaling down just like this. So as you can see, pretty smooth, along with the fade in, looks really nice. Next up, you want to make sure that you have your playhead on the second keyframe of your animation. And then all you got to do is simply select your image, and then we're going to apply some scale animation to it. So we're going to click on add animation above the timeline. Properties is going to be position and scale. I'll leave the easing as is, but I'll extend this a little bit more like that. And then I'm going to select my second keyframe. Then I can simply just resize the image from here on the canvas, or I can go under settings if I want to. Both works for me, they're fine. You just want to make sure that your image inside your masks so that you don't have any problem or any gaps in between, just like that. So this is looking good so far. We got that covered. Now it's time for us to start working on the second design, right? So we got that right there. All we got to do is start with the rounded rectangle. That's basically the background. So I can just grab this guy over here, and then I'm going to add a fade in animation to it as well. So I have it selected, go under on the right panel under motion. I'm going to select fade, and then I'm going to add fade in animation right there. And as soon as this, the animation or the fade in happens, I'd like to go ahead and then grab my mask layer, make sure that it actually starts here, and then I'm going to grab my image. Let me just get this guy away, the one in the middle right here, and then I'm going to select my mask layer right there. I want to make sure it's in here, and then grab my second image, which is the photographer right there. And then, well, it looks like somebody just taking a photo. So let's click on the fit to screen, and then I want to drag my mask above it just for now, just so I can see better. And then I can decrease its opacity a little bit more like this. And from there, I can position my image. Again, I'm going to have this one a little bit bigger in size like this, so we can only just see her face along with the camera right there. And then I'm going to drag the image back again along with the mask layer right there. Don't forget to increase the opacity all the way back up to 100%. And then when you're done, your next step would be to select the actual image. Again, go under settings, track matte, and then going to open up the drop down menu, and then we're going to go with mask number 2. Select that. Don't forget to change the type from Luma to Alpha, just like that, so we can see the image in full color. And then we're good to go. Next up, we will start animating our mask. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to select my mask layer, and then I'm going to have this one scale from the bottom all the way to the top. So to do that, I'm going to go under settings where it says anchor point. You click that, and then we're going to choose the bottom middle like that. Now we have the arrow pointing to the bottom middle on the image. So all I'm going to do is I will simply just click on add animation. I will do scale, right? And then I'm going to select my first keyframe and simply drag this guy all the way to the bottom, just like this. Now, I tend to forget that for some reason, but let's go back and hover between both keyframes. Click that, and then we choose opacity, and then go back and select the first keyframe one more time. Want to make sure that you decrease opacity all the way back to 0. And then obviously when it's going to start playing, it's just going to fade in and scales up all the way just like this. And then from there, you make sure that your playhead is on the second keyframe of your mask, and simply just select your image. And then you want to click on add animation. It's going to be position and scale. And then all you got to do is simply select the second keyframe. Don't worry about the first design. We'll rearrange the length and all that a little later. But let's continue to work on design number 2. So selecting the second keyframe of this one, and I can easily just zoom out of my canvas, or again, I can resize that from on the canvas or do it under settings. It's totally up to you, but I'm going to zoom out and scale down the image just like this. And then it's going to have a wider shot on the lady right there. Then I could just go back and then rearrange these layers just so I can extend them a little bit more so we can see everything and we're not losing any of our stuff. Again, it's very important that you line up your masks with your images. So everything needs to be perfectly lined up together. Now let's just go back here and rearrange the order of the images as well as the layers, just to make sure that everything is good to go. All right, so we're good to go. Now we're about to animate or design our third image, right? So I'm gonna go back to the very beginning right here. So this should all start on the second keyframe when the image scales down. What I'm gonna do is I'll actually grab those so that I have them start right here. Again, I want to make sure that they're both are lined up perfectly together from the beginning, like that. And then I'm going to select my rounded rectangle. I'm going to make this guy fade in. So go under motion on the right panel, choose fade and then fade in. And as soon as the animation finishes, I want to make sure that my playhead is after the animation right here. And I'm going to drag the mask number 3 all the way to after the fade in animation. And then from there, I'll simply, I can go ahead and grab the third image right there, click on fit to screen so I can make it smaller. And then I want to make sure that my mask layer is above it, decrease opacity a little so I can see better. And then I can select my image and then drag it where I want it. So let's just scale it up a little, something like that, to only display close up on her face, just like this. And then from there, don't forget to click on the mask layer one more time. Increase the opacity all the way back to 100%, just like that. And then all you got to do is make changes to the anchor point, right? So this is going to be this similar as the first design. And so what we're going to do is we'll go under settings where it says anchor point. We'll choose top middle right there. And then we're going to click on add animation. And I'm going to do position. I'm sorry, that's going to be scale and opacity. And so I'm going to select my first keyframe, and I'm going to get this guy to scale it up all the way to the top right there. I'm also going to decrease opacity all the way to 100. I know I haven't forgotten about applying track mats, but I'll take care of that in a second. So we got that covered. Now I can go back and then we can see that the shape is being scaled up from the top like this. Now I can easily just select the image under settings, go to track mat, and then open up the drop down menu, and then I'm going to select mask number 3, and I can easily just change the type from Luma to Alpha, just like that. And then make my playhead on the second keyframe of my mask, select the image, and then simply apply some scale and position animation. So I'm going to click on add animation right here, position and scale. Now I've got everything set. I'm going to click my second keyframe on the image right there, and I could just scale it down a little bit so I can have a wide shot on the lady right there, just like that. And zoom out of my timeline. Want to make sure that everything is lined up in the perfectly fine on the timeline. So let's actually extend all these layers a little bit more like this. And we can also do the same for the entire layers. Again, this is very important because now that the mask is still available on the timeline, it needs to be perfectly lined up with your actual image. Otherwise, it's not going to show up. And let me show you what I mean by that. So right now, I've got my third mask that is not lined up until the end. So here's what happens when you start playing. Once we go after this image, it's going to disappear. Why? Because the image layer or the mask layer is shorter in length than the image. So it's very important that you line this up perfectly fine with your image so that you can continue to have the design shown up and masked inside your shape. So that's pretty much it. I hope you found this helpful. Be sure to subscribe if you are not a subscriber yet. Like this video and share it with others so they can learn how to use TrackMat. Again, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.